Welcome to the Big Points F1 Silverstone preview podcast. Tom here with Sam in the virtual studio, and we're looking forward to another British Grand Prix. The place where it all began back in 1950, a circuit full of memories, a circuit full of history in Formula One. Often something you think of when you think of Silverstone is, of course, grey clouds and a wet, dry kind of race. And that's definitely what we had in 2025, isn't it?
Yeah, 2025, last season's race turned into a Silverstone classic with constant changeable conditions throughout the weekend, which led to, teams on incredibly varying wet, dry strategies, which led to, some absolute chaos even before the race had begun, and then some incredible results as well. Starting on a damp track, which had been raining, everyone go to the formation lap was on intermediates, but then we had about 6 cars pitting at the end of the formation lap to switch to slicks, taking that massive gamble that the track was going to dry out quickly, and they take a huge advantage of that. Notably, sort of Russell and Leclerc were two of the big names that took huge gambles on that. And sadly for them, didn't pay off at all because the track did not dry as quickly as they thought, but it led to, a fascinating race and some brilliant contests between drivers and some amazing results.
I love it when that happens. You've got some cars diving into the pits. Then you always have that one, don't you, when somebody goes onto the dry tyre first and everybody's sort of watching their lap times. The camera then suddenly cuts to like Stroll in 18th for no reason instead of following the leaders because they want to see like how quick his sector times are or can he hold it on the circuit. And Silverstone is one of those, isn't it? It's so flat. There's so many sort of big, wide, high-speed corners where if you're not on the right tyres, it's just impossible to have any kind of pace whatsoever. You're always going to be spinning off. I remember sort of 2008, I think like Massa spinning like 5 times in the rain. There's been all sorts of things. And it didn't work out for the Mercedes last year. Antonelli with a DNF, Russell finishing down in 10th. But higher up the order, it ended with a very famous podium, didn't it?
It did. Nico Hülkenberg finally got that monkey off his back of, the most F1 starts without a podium. In a kick Sauber of all things, which I think up until then had, been pretty much sort of this green tractor. But incredible for Hülkenberg. The kick Sauber team, I think, did a fantastic job. He was on the perfect tyres at the perfect time throughout the race. And I don't even remember when he was in P3, I think Hamilton was maybe P4 or there was someone behind him P4. And you just thought, oh, he's just going to gobble him up now. And this is Hülkenberg's turn. But he didn't. He had the pace. He had the experience. And I think that was probably the most popular podium in Formula One in the last many, many years, because everyone up and down the paddock was so happy for Nico.
Everyone knew he was
so happy.
Just good value for that podium, wasn't he? Like more than just good value for that podium. He's had incredible results in all kinds of cars. And as you say, those last 20 laps, I remember them being really kind of agonizing, because nothing against the Hamilton podium would have been great too. Of course, you'd love to stand again on the podium in your home race. So for Hamilton, it would have meant a lot. And but I think even the hardcore British fans might have been hoping that he wasn't going to just eat into that advantage. And it was just a masterclass, wasn't it, from Hülkenberg and the team of just getting every decision right in a race where sometimes you've just got to make sort of one decision at the right time. Sometimes you've just got the pace to finish where you finish anyway. But this was one of those races you've got to make sort of 4 or 5 really contentious calls. You've got to sort of take the risk on those calls and get all of them right, especially when your car doesn't have the underlying pace. And the kick stake Sauber F1 team or whatever it was called back then, like they just about managed it. And just one of the greatest podiums. I still remember feeling a bit sorry for Nico Hülkenberg because he got a weird Lego trophy, which is like
he did.
The bloke deserves a proper.
He probably think he deserves something made of silver or bronze or something of value. But he did. The Lego trophy perhaps. But I know he's got young kids, so I'm sure they appreciate it.
In fairness,
the Lego trophy. Yeah.
It could have been worse. In front of Nico Hülkenberg and his very popular podium were the 2 McLarens, the all-conquering McLarens. Remember when they were Constructors' Championship leaders? Piastri second, Norris first. A home win for Norris. And he was very emotional on the podium as well, wasn't he? I remember this, his family, the seas of orange-clad fans hoping for a British winner in Norris that year. And they got one. Norris got the win that he wanted.
Yeah, he did. And I think it just shows that F1 drivers, not a lot of them are resident in the UK anymore. Most of them are sort of, Monaco based. But I think this just shows that winning your home race is so important for all of these guys, and so few actually have the opportunity to be, at a home race in a car that can compete and be at the front of the grid. So actually ticking that box in sort of your on your F1 CV of having won your home race is just it's just a huge tip for Lando, and something he'll cherish and remember. And obviously being part of it, then going on to being part of a championship winning season as well, it just makes it all that sweeter, because that was a real step forwards. I think it really ate into that lead I think that Piastri still had at the time. And it was really where, that second half of the season, then, Lando really kicked on. Yeah, fantastic for any driver to win their home race. And, with a bit of British bias, seeing a Brit on top of the podium in Silverstone is always special.
Yeah, he was the 13th different British winner of the British Grand Prix at Silverstone. He said, I don't know if it's being hyperbolic, but Lando Norris did say that race is one that he would trade all of his other victories for. A critic might say he hasn't got that many victories to trade for it, but I wonder if that's still the case after the championship. I don't know if it's something about the fact that obviously Silverstone's mid-season and the championship is, obviously at the end of the season. But it feels like we saw kind of a more emotional, more visibly happy Lando Norris having won the British Grand Prix than we saw after his title win, which was a little bit muted somehow. And then, of course, the fact that the McLaren's not super quick this year means it's even more muted. But am I right to feel that was,
I suppose,
a big
once
deal?
you get to the end of perhaps when you get to the end of the season, I think with the way Lando won his title was probably, I think it was more probably a sense of relief than anything that he gotten over the line, especially, about, had a lot of McLaren had a lot of bad decisions towards the end of the season that, they should have had it wrapped up long before Abu Dhabi. The sort of showdown in the desert shouldn't have even been a thing. Lando should have been world champion, probably a couple of races before that. So perhaps he had more of a sense of, relief, especially those last few laps where he was all he needed was P3, and he was P3, but one mistake and he's dropped down and he's losing the title. I think it's maybe that. Whereas, just winning in Silverstone and realizing that dream is probably just more, you can be more sort of unbridled joy. And maybe, then you shift your focus onto the next race, perhaps.
Obviously, Norris got the win. There's a fair few British drivers out there on the grid this year as well, 5 of them in total, who will be looking to get a good result. If we think maybe your Lindblad, Behrman, they're not necessarily going to be right up at the top of the order, but Norris has got good form there, as we've just mentioned. Of course, Russell maybe comes in as certainly one of the big favourites, and Hamilton is the record holder around Silverstone with 9 victories. That is a monumental tally for his home Grand Prix, isn't it?
It is, yeah, it is. For one driver to win even one race 9 times is quite astonishing. But especially when it's your home race as well. He's just been so dominant around this track over so many years. And he's had some really memorable victories, and along with the memorable victories come hugely memorable incidents as well. That huge crash incident with Verstappen in 2021. Where lap 1 they were racing towards Cops, title rivals, and Lewis, rightly or wrongly, there was a wheel at the inside of Verstappen, which Horner, pushing Horner's on the radio saying something you never ever do, but it sent Verstappen into the most monumental accident and put him out of the race. I think it was a 51G crash, which is just astonishing.
It's still the one, isn't it? If somebody shows a replay of that. If that's posted online, you're going to get hundreds of thousands of comments being this was fair, this was unfair, this was super dangerous, this should have been a penalty, this, that, and the other. Like, there's still so much feeling about that, even though it's like 5 years ago now.
Exactly. And I think, just the way that season finished as well, we could go on about that for a couple of hours. But I think with the way that season finished between Hamilton and Verstappen, and then sort of the struggles that Hamilton had after that just make it, all the more significant. So it was a real sort of flashpoint in that Hamilton-Verstappen rivalry. Hamilton still went on to win that race. That was his eighth victory, even though despite a 10-second penalty, such that was the dominance of that Mercedes over the rest of the pack. Once Verstappen was out, that he was able to still go ahead and win that race. And, that really led to then the rest of the season being just that absolute, classic battle real, niggly title race as well, where you could really, there was no love lost between either of those garages or either of those teams. Team principals going at each other, drivers going at each other. The controversy in Abu Dhabi on that last lap, it was, it all made for one of the best seasons in Formula
When
One.
you say it like that, I sort of want that back, like the old, like the new Red Bull and Zach Brown as well. Like the battles between Red Bull and McLaren in recent years, they've all been so sort of cordial. Everyone's just been like, oh, respect to McLaren, coming from the back and getting the wins now. And Red Bull's not quite the force that it once was, but everyone knows Verstappen's the best. So it's everything's sort of everyone's very
perhaps a little bit too nice.
Everyone's quite circumspect as well, aren't they? Like Norris was always like, oh, I'm probably not the best. But I'll try my best, and if the car's good, like I'll take some wins. I'll give it everything for the title. It's nothing like that. Two absolute titans going like head to head.
It reminds me a little bit of on a football pitch when there's a bit of a scrap and you have sort of 20 players all in all grappling each other, and the commentator says, "Oh, we never like to see scenes like this." And I think every person in the stadium or on telly is like, "We very much want this. Is exactly what we want to see. We fans absolutely love it." So. Yeah, maybe as we get towards the end of the season, and there's if we've got a title race on, let's see if we see it. One comment can change anything, and relationships can break down very quickly in Formula One, as we've seen in the past. So let's see.
Yeah, very true. I wonder if we'll get that moment. It seemed like just to go back to that big Hamilton Verstappen crash of 2021. It was that moment for Hamilton, wasn't it, where he had that point where he's like, look, I've got to prove to Max Verstappen that I will not yield, that I just won't get out of the way. And of course, it resulted in an extremely dangerous accident. Thankfully, everyone's okay, all good. But like it was that, irrespective of kind of the outcome of it, it was on the track. It was that moment of, look, I cannot yield to this guy, because if I do, my championship challenge is sort of evaporating in front of my eyes. And we saw these moments then with Norris, and it took Norris a few interactions then, didn't it, on track with Verstappen sort of pushing him off or bullying him a little bit and just getting the better of him in on-track battles, until Norris was like, right then, we're going to have a crash next time. If you do this, we're going to have a crash next time. And then, it's like you have to sort of set yourself, don't you? And just say, you can't push me out of the way. And once or twice, those are going to end in disaster, as they did there. But obviously provides some epic moments. Any of the other Hamilton victories that sort of come to mind? He obviously won a lot of them in that incredibly dominant Mercedes. I think Rosberg also had a really good record at Silverstone himself, actually, from back in the day.
One of the two that stand out, was there a race during COVID where he had the flat tire on the last lap? And he had sort of a 30-second gap to Verstappen, and you could still, that onboard still pops up every now and then on my algorithm with Bono going, his tire goes, he's got about half a lap to go, and about every 10 seconds he's just giving, gap to Verstappen, and it's coming down and down and down. He crosses the finish line. Lewis, on the radio, is that it? Is that it? And he's like, yeah, that's it. You've done it. Such a shame there were no fans there for that day, because that would have been, imagine, the Silverstone crowd, cheer, sort of also almost pulling Lewis across the line with a flat tire on the last race. So that was astonishing. But the other one that was obviously very special was 2024 with his last Silverstone race to Mercedes. Getting that 9th win with Mercedes at his last home race. Probably the most emotional I might have seen Hamilton. I think it was just huge sense of pride and relief. He'd not had a good season at all up until then. Mercedes have been really struggling. So to get that last win in front of his home crowd and sort of sign off his Mercedes career with that was very, very special.
Yeah, it was indeed. Oh, that the tyre blowouts, that's sort of been a thing. I remember Ferraris having tyre blowouts at Silverstone as well in the past, near the end of the race. Late tyre drama seems to be a kind of Silverstone recurring theme. But to bring it to this weekend, obviously, good memories for Norris, good memories for Hamilton, many, many good memories for Hamilton. It's not been a particularly happy hunting ground for Russell, but what do you think is sort of lining up for this weekend for us weather-wise? It does look like a hot weekend, but I did notice that on the Sunday there is just a sort of 10 to 20% chance of precipitation, especially before the Grand Prix. So it's not out of the picture that we could have something similar to last year with this kind of, maybe a drying track for the first few laps.
Yeah, I mean that would be fantastic if it could. It does look like there's another sort of mini heat wave coming to the UK. So any sort of anything that can throw sauce and cats amongst the pigeons in terms of strategy would be fantastic. But I think this weekend I know Max has made a few comments about driving his Red Bull in the sim and saying that he's not a fan of how this hybrid sort of boost era is going to work in Silverstone. But sometimes I think Max just can generally be sometimes a little bit pessimistic. And we've actually, the racing we've seen all season has actually been fantastic. We saw it last week in Austria. It was the actual, head-to-head battles and wheel-to-wheel action was really good. And, if there's a track that's going to give you good wheel-to-wheel action with drivers being able to follow close and overtake it, it's Silverstone. So let's see.
Yeah.
I think it could be a fascinating race with a lot of overtakes and hopefully a lot of real, close wheel-to-wheel battles.
Yeah, there are plenty of overtaking opportunities at Silverstone. The issues from Max came from the sim. He said he had to just start laughing basically in the sim because he was worried that it has ruined, like Silverstone, one of the great tracks of F1 is sort of ruined by the way these hybrid cars deploy the energy. So the difference is, obviously last week in Austria, we have loads of straights, loads of sort of high energy deployment areas, but then you have loads of heavy braking zones as well. At the end of every straight in Austria, you've got a big braking zone to harvest that energy and get it back so they can deploy again. This time, Silverstone's full of high speed straights, but also high speed corners. So Max's worry is that it's going to be ruined in that none of the drivers are going to be driving flat out. They're not going to be able to give it their all. There'll be sort of super clipping. There'll be drivers having to harvest because they can't harvest in the corners, so they'll have to harvest on the straights. They won't be able to go all out on the straights. I wonder if that means we'll see a lot of variance of when drivers are deploying energy, and I wonder if we'll see some of these sort of tactical energy related overtakes that we've seen in glimpses this season, which, to be honest, if the drivers aren't flat out, that's not great, of course, is it, in such a great driver's track. But if we see loads of energy related overtakes, it could also be really interesting too.
Yeah, I think it could be. I think you're gonna, if drivers are differentiating where they're going to use their battery, or some have got different battery, different battery levels at other points where they, maybe don't expect. Perhaps we could see a few drivers get caught out, like we saw earlier in the season with, Burnham had a big crash, when someone was going on much slower in front of him than he expected. So hopefully not for something like that, but you never know. But I think the drivers are getting a lot more used to where they can harvest, what they can do, and how they use these systems. So it'll just be really fascinating to see which drivers can adapt their style and adapt these cars to Silverstone. So perhaps you might see the more experienced drivers perhaps being able to do that a little bit better. But then you've got someone with a brutal raw pace like Antonelli who could just clip it all together and and have a really really strong race. So hopefully Silverstone always usually it's never a dull race usually. I can't remember the last time there was sort of a boring Silverstone. They always throw something up. So hopefully with these new regs and different strategies or different driving styles and how the cars are working, we'll have lots of overtaking, lots of wheel-to-wheel action, and a fun race.
Definitely, fingers crossed for that. Yeah, we had the Ferrari mini engine upgrade that didn't appear to do too much in Austria. It was never going to do too much in Austria. We did have the Red Bull aero and mechanical upgrade, which really seemed to work in the hands of Verstappen especially, but Agile got a solid result as well in Austria. But if we're talking about energy deployment, there's only one team that you're looking to this year, surely. The Mercedes, that's where they've had their real strength this year, is being able to quickly redeploy their energy, being able to keep that boost for longer than other teams who maybe have to drop off towards the end of the straights. The Mercedes have apparently been able to do it. Ferrari was saying in Austria that they had good grunt out of the corners. They just couldn't hold it all the way down the long straights. So all that in mind, does this make Mercedes big favourites for this weekend? Is George Russell finally going to get a really good result at home? Or what are the predictions do you perhaps have for us for Silverstone?
Yeah, I think Russell will be, he's got to look at this weekend and be like, right, I've got to win. I'm back in some sort of form, got some confidence back. I think this, race has come at the perfect time. He's like, right, I've got some confidence. I don't have a break. I can just go straight back into the weekend. I know I can do this. I was back, back on the top step of that podium. It's a home race. Up until now, he wouldn't have had a better opportunity to win his home Grand Prix. So, and talk about a motivated guy who's like, I can win my home race. I can take some points off Antonelli. I think he's going to be going all out for it. He's great on a Saturday, great in qualifying. I think if he can have another really solid Saturday and put that Mercedes in P1, I think he will be hard to beat. Sometimes George's race pace this season hasn't been as impressive as others, so let's see. But Russell's to win and to keep the championship going, cut that gap down in the championship, and keep the excitement alive.
I sort of went for that as my prediction at the end of the Austria pod as well. I thought Russell might take some stopping this weekend. He does need a kind of commanding victory, though, doesn't he? That's one thing that he's missing this year, a proper commanding victory. Austria was great. He didn't put a foot wrong, really, in Austria. But as you said, the race pace hasn't always been there. It's always looked like the gap is closing. It's sort of, can he hold off kind of things? Whereas Antonelli has on a few occasions just been able to make the best of the car, make the best of the conditions, and just get away, or at least control the race pretty comfortably. We mentioned earlier as well, of course, that Norris, it was super important for him to win Silverstone, arguably more important than anything in his title challenge. That was sort of put to one side. This was like a standalone race for Norris last year. Just win this, and whatever happens in the title race, that's a massive weight off my mind. And I wonder if the same feeling is there for Russell this weekend. But aside from the big ones, we know Mercedes are going to be up there, there or thereabouts. Do you have any other predictions for us from sort of further downfield? Who else are you watching out for in terms of the big points, and maybe some drivers who can sneak into the top 10 and earn us some big points in our predictions?
Yes, some big points. We saw last weekend in Austria, I made the mistake of only putting one V-carb in my predictions, and I put Lawson in the wrong place. I put him in P10 instead of P9. So, they've been very, very impressive this last sort of 4 or 5 races, just very, very solid. Lawson in particular has just been, regularly scoring points. So I think watch out for V-carb this weekend. I think they could be that car seems very, very well hooked up, very, solid in terms of reliability. Lawson and Lindblad have had really, really good pace the last few weeks. And then a little bit further, not even further down, but I've just got a feeling about Gasly this weekend. I think he might have one of those Gasly weekends where he does something really, really fantastic. And maybe we've got a little bit of jumble of the order. Maybe there's a bit of a scrap in the sort of P3 to P7 region between some of the top 4 teams, and Gasly pops up with a P4, P5. So I'm going to say, let's say a Gasly. I won't go as far as say Gasly podium, but maybe let's say big points for Gasly. Yeah.
Big points for Gasly. Okay, watch out for that then. A Gasly podium wouldn't even be anywhere near as shocking as a Hülkenberg podium from last year.
No, that's
maybe
true.
Hulk's going to be back up there. Audi could do with a result. Williams on their home Grand Prix. I don't really see them getting anything, unfortunately.
No, I don't. I've rewatched the highlights of the Austria race this morning, and I don't know if you've seen the onboard from Sainz's breakdown. His car made the most disgusting noise I think I've ever heard when it gave out, and I just think, as it's going to be hot as well, and just that car just doesn't seem to do too well with high temperatures. So the reliability
overweight
just isn't there for me. Yeah, overweight.
Exactly.
A little bit like me, overweight and too hot. So.
But you're very reliable, at least. You're very reliable.
I'm reliable, yeah.
So there's that, yeah. Well, we'll have a lot to look out for. Obviously, all these predictions coming well before qualifying, so we'll be sure after qualifying to be getting in our top 10s and trying to predict exactly who finishes where. We need the kind of 8, 9, 10 for our big points. You get, the position points. So it's all very well if we can predict Russell maybe winning, Antonelli maybe second, but that's only a couple of points for us. So 8th, 9th, 10th is what we're really looking out for. Any of those sort of middle top 10 runners, if you can get a few of those right, you're absolutely nailed on. So one thing I'm hoping for on Saturday then, I guess, is a really a nice consistent qualifying where you feel like there's a nice sort of team battle there where the 2 Mercedes are quickest, the 2 Red Bulls are the next quickest, the 2 McLarens follow, and then there's a nice easy predictable top 10, but it is never ever like that. We'll give it our best shot anyway, and we'll report back after Silverstone to see just how wrong we were with our predictions on Big Points F1.
Absolutely.
Cheers for watching. See ya.
Cheers. Bye-bye.